In my many years playing games, I don't think I've ever seen such a sharply divided response to a new release as there has been for Pokémon Legends ZA, and it's honestly such a shame. I absolutely loved the game as a whole, but some particular aspects of it are deeply frustrating. It's unfortunate because the game clearly has a ton of love and care put into it, to the point where I think it's absurd to say that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company don't care about the games. Yet they made so many dumb and puzzling decisions that really hurt not just the experience of playing it, but its reception by the greater community.
Hi, I'm Tudens, and I've spent the past month playing ZA. I took my time and really paid attention to what the game does well and its many flaws. I've nearly 100% completed the game, and after it all, I've come to the opinion that Pokémon Legends ZA is a truly beautiful game. But that beauty is imperfect. Hidden behind flaw after flaw, frustration after frustration, it's an experience of skyscraping highs and sewage-drenched lows.
Wait, before you skip forward, I need to explain this video's structure because otherwise it won't make sense. I have 13 highs and 13 lows for the game that are organized by letter, but we're starting in the middle because they're, well, mid. Mostly inoffensive, but also unremarkable. We will be ending with Z for the lowest part of the game and A for the highest. As such, the video jumps around a little bit from topic to topic. I will also clearly mark if a section will contain spoilers, both on screen and in the description timestamps. I won't be spoiling everything, but we'll be discussing the ending to an extent and into the deep post-game. But that will be near the end of the video. So let's get into it. 13 highs and 13 lows of Pokémon Legends ZA. I'm disappointed to say that I have to start with the catching. It's incredibly mid, and I have to mark it as a low because it's such a downgrade from Arceus. Look, I get it. Arceus is for catching and ZA is for battling, but they didn't have to make the catching mechanics worse. It doesn't feel particularly good to catch Pokemon, and in fact it can feel like a chore. I never really found myself wanting to do it, whereas in Arceus it was all I wanted to do. Stealth and backstrides are minimized to the point of being pretty much irrelevant outside of the first couple hours of the game. They're much harder to execute than in Arceus, and they're also much less effective. The game wants you to battle and then catch. The developers made an adjustment and allow you to knock out the Pokemon without losing the ability to catch it. There will be a short window after depleting the Mon's health bar for you to throw a Pokeball, and you will have exactly one chance to catch it. This is a welcome change, and probably necessary due to the hectic nature of the new battle system. It would be very challenging to lower a health bar without accidentally knocking the Pokemon out, especially when there's a horde of them swarming you, which happens a lot. Otherwise, you can throw a Pokeball at any point while you're battling it, but the chances of a successful catch at that point are significantly lower. I will admit, using repeated AoE moves to knock out a handful of Pokemon at once and then chucking Pokeballs is pretty fun and fast. Regardless, I was not particularly excited to complete my Pokedex, partially because I found the catching to be so disappointing. The gradually building stress, anticipation, and relief from Arceus' catching system is gone, and it's sorely missed in my opinion. Almost contrary to my last point, the wild zones are the better half of catching. They're always densely populated, usually with a lot of variety. Alphas are easy to find, and there can be some pretty unique ones. I imagine it's much easier to hunt shiny alpha Pokemon in ZA than in Arceus, if that's what you're into. There's also quite a few wild zones, 20 in total. Some are a lot bigger than they seem at first, too. Like everything else in Lumiose, they can get pretty vertical. With that said, they're still very mid. While there's a lot of them, they all look almost the same with a few notable exceptions. The power plant is cool and fits well, as does the graveyard, but the Arctic area is very out of place. I'm sure it's explained by Quasartico Inc. using climate control technology or something, but it's still weird to have a random patch of Winter Wonderland. I'm really sad to say that the ZA Royale is both a low and is mid. It's the advertised core loop of the game, for goodness sake. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about the battle system. I'm talking about the nightly tournament structure. Honestly, it's just a drag. It starts off fine with decent pacing, but slows down the further into the game you go. It's not so bad if you get good cards that mesh well with your Pokemon and the Pokemon you're facing, but there's no guarantee of that. The cards are important and can make the difference between completing a challenger's ticket in 10 minutes or between 20 and 30. Either way, you can expect to slog through battle after battle, victory animation after victory animation, because let's be real, you're not losing these. It wouldn't be such a problem if the battles had more substance, but most of the time you sneak up on a trainer and one-shot their Pokemon, which admittedly feels pretty good to do, but it also shows that the anime AI is very underbaked. No joke, you can get behind a lamppost that doesn't hide you at all, your Pokemon will be fully visible and will be charging at the enemy Pokemon. But it doesn't matter, because you are technically out of sight and the trainer doesn't register that they're about to get pounced on, despite the fact that their Pokemon do see you and actually try to warn the trainer of the giant Emboar about to unleash fury upon him. It's all very silly and doesn't work correctly. Then each trainer will have one, maybe two more Mons that you will also probably one-shot. It's a mindless grind and gets very repetitive in already boring environments with even less variety than the wild zones. It's mostly a problem for the post-game, which we'll talk about later. Alright, it's time for a bit of a lightning round. Character customization is back in force, and it's great. I don't think there's ever been so many options for skin, hair, face, and clothing. Unfortunately, there are way more options targeting female characters than male characters, but that doesn't mean male characters can't be fabulous. Either gender can wear anything, an excellent and obvious choice. I just wish there were more options. Despite the fact that there are 231 unique Pokemon, the Pokédex feels really limited. The range of Mons that you can actually catch is very small. You can find the occasional rare alpha that gets a bit more exciting, but again, this is part of why the catching feels so meh. At least completing the dex isn't a huge grind. The museum has an incredible amount of love and care poured into it. It's an amazing homage to Kalos, Hisui, and the Pokemon world as a whole. It even implies that Volo is alive, which is an amazing bit of lore that got me really excited, even if it's likely he'll never be used in the games again for a major role. If Legends ZA does anything right, it's how it handles lore. Alright, lightning round over. Let's talk about another considerable downgrade from Arceus. Mabel's research sucks. There's no unique tasks, aside from a few that highlight some minor features like hanging out at a bench or a cafe. There's no battle tasks, no double dipping like in Arceus, just catch tons of the same Pokemon over and over. Except there's no real reason to catch tons of a single type of Pokemon other than these fill the bar quests. It just feels bad. What's worse is that there are very valuable rewards behind these horrible grinds. Tons of powerful TMs and valuable post-game items, not to mention the Shiny Charm. But do you know what you have to do to get the Shiny Charm? You have to take part in 1,000 battles. I got through the entire main story and all of the post-game, and I was only at around 300. They could have halved that, and it would still have been too much. It's just a terrible system, and I don't get it. I don't understand what they were thinking. Look, it's definitely lazy design. I can't deny that. They could have done so much more with it. But I love Mega Starmie. I think it's hilariously dumb, and sometimes I like hilariously dumb. As one of my commenters so eloquently said, two things can be true. I actually think all of the new Megas have good design, which is impressive in its own right. There is a lot of padding in this game. I kind of feel like the ZA Royale itself is padding. There's also lots of running somewhere, talking to someone, then running somewhere else. Sometimes there's a battle in there, but it's usually pretty vapid. This gets real bad in the mid-game. At least there's fast travel. It isn't just the mission structure though. Menus add a lot of padding as well, especially when you have to swap out Pokemon from your boxes for a quest. It's lightning fast on Switch 2, but I have a feeling that's not the case on Switch 1. Speaking of side missions, a few of them are actually quite good. They have unique cutscenes and have decent stories. One of them was actually really sad and kind of a gut punch. But these are few and far between. It's rank S for side missions, because they mostly suck. A lot of them are boring fetch quests and rarely have a good story or any story at all. Particularly annoying are the missions that require you to put a specific Pokemon in your party, or worse, battle with a specific Pokemon that you will probably have to raise with either time or resources. It's weird, some side missions allow you to select them from your boxes, and some require you to move them around into your party, regardless of whether or not you're giving them up. I know this seems minor, but it's just more friction in an already vapid part of the game. They also pop up constantly. Between even the most minor story beats. It gets tiring, so why not just skip them? The problem is that the side missions are actually really important. They give very powerful held items that are necessary for completing the dex and building your team if you want to take part in competitive. While they can be annoying when they pop up as side missions, the battle cafes are very challenging and rewarding gauntlets. They're infinitely repeatable, so if you're going for the 1,000 battles, this is probably a good way to do it. One of them has you fighting 5 battles against 3 Pokemon at the same time, and another is a 10 battle gauntlet that required me to carefully plan what moves I was going to use and when, specific opportunities to switch and to which Pokemon, and when I would Mega Evolve to push through specific sections. They're real tests of mechanics and planning, and are absolutely not pushovers. But this leads me to a pretty important low. I've spoken a lot about game feel and its importance in my videos before, but in case you're not clear on what it is, game feel basically comes down to the responsiveness and sensory feedback a game gives you when performing in-game actions. ZA has terrible game feel. It's very floaty, meaning it feels more like you're gliding across the ground rather than walking or running, which can work if the movement matches, like if you had roller skates, for example, but otherwise it just feels weird. The game also has responsiveness issues. There are a lot of lost inputs even on Switch 2, and it's probably much worse on Switch 1. The roto-glide and dodging are particularly bad, which can lead to frustrating falls off rooftops and getting hit when you shouldn't have. Lost inputs also happen in almost every battle. Attacks aren't registered, switching is delayed, plus mode won't activate, and it takes forever to Mega Evolve. And I don't think these things are intentional. The UI doesn't indicate that you're unable to use an action other than just after you switch in, so I really do think it's an input lag issue most of the time. Now let's talk about Lumiose City itself a little bit. It really does change throughout the game, which makes it feel a bit more alive, similar to Jubilife Village in Arceus but on a much bigger scale. More scaffolding will appear, wild zones will pop up, Pokemon and people will come and go. It's usually linked to those side quests that I don't really like, but it helps. That's most of the positive I have to say about Lumiose. It is actually possible to have an entire game take place in a single city and work. It's been done many, many times and in different forms. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in ZA. I'll give Lumiose one thing. It does feel like a city, albeit a small one. It's maze-like, and it's actually kinda easy to get lost in. It weirdly reminds me of playing RuneScape as a kid and getting lost between Lumbridge, Varrock, and Falador. The problem is that it's so samey. There's only a few notable landmarks, and otherwise it looks very similar everywhere you go. It's just a disappointment when outdoors. Building interiors are absolutely beautiful, like every place you go. I just wish there were more buildings you can enter. There really should have been. The sewers are also surprisingly detailed, but they're also very small and underwhelming, honestly. I was hoping for deep, dark crypts like in actual Paris, France. Exploring the rooftops is a relative positive. It captures at least a minor sense of parkouring around the city, and there are often some cool Pokemon to find, especially alphas. Still, there's not much to them. But the worst of it all is the day-night cycle, which I'm including in this section. It's such an infuriating system, and I don't think I've ever seen a worse implementation of it in a video game, even within the Pokemon series. All the complaints you've heard are correct. It's essentially a timer with no positive aspect. All it does is punish you. And yes, there were multiple times throughout the game when I had nearly caught a rare Pokemon and it disappeared because of the day-night transition. It's bad, and should have been caught and fixed in testing. Oh, and something windows. I honestly didn't even notice them after a while, but that doesn't make it acceptable. I'm pleasantly surprised to be able to say this, but the alpha Pokemon are a considerable improvement over Arceus, and I thought they were very well implemented in that game already. They're just as scary and powerful, but are even more persistent. They will chase you to the ends of the earth. They're also massive, possibly bigger, and do more than just meander around usually. It's also pretty easy to find unique alphas to catch, which makes team building all the more fun. It's not really unreasonable to form an entire team of specific alphas that you're looking for.
This one is going to be controversial, but stick with me here. I'm convinced this game should never have been developed for the Switch 1 and should have been a Switch 2 exclusive. Now, before you say it, I know the install base for the Switch 1 is significantly bigger than the Switch 2. That's not the point. I also know there's some fairly compelling evidence to suggest that ZA was actually delayed, though this has been in no way confirmed and likely never will be. By the way, please consider subscribing if you're enjoying this. It really helps.
I want to be clear, I'm not blaming the Switch 1. There are games on Switch 1 that look comparable or better than ZA and run just fine. I've even heard that ZA itself runs relatively well compared to Scarlet and Violet, which isn't saying much of course. I'm blaming Game Freak, Nintendo, and the Pokémon Company for apparently biting off more than they could chew, which in itself is an absurd statement. Both versions are hurt by each other's experience. With all the menuing, padding, and input lag I've experienced on Switch 2, I can only imagine it's 3 to 4 times worse on Switch 1, if not more. The visuals are probably toned down on Switch 2 to account for Switch 1, even considering the fact that the game already looks way better on Switch 2. But honestly, this is all just because Game Freak seems incompetent at proper optimization. Not to say I know anything about it, I don't, but I'm also not a game developer. Game Freak shouldn't have committed to making ZA Switch 1 compatible if they couldn't make it function properly. Alright, back to something positive, and it's a real big positive. The Rogue Mega Evolution boss fights are great! They're straight up a combination between the Arceus Noble bosses and the battle system in ZA, and they are surprisingly fun and challenging. There is so much to pay attention to. Attacks can be really hard to dodge effectively, and you don't only have to think about yourself, but your Pokemon as well. In fact, sometimes it's best to just recall them. Super attacks can be really visually crazy and stressful, and some attacks can leave AoE zones on the ground. You need to pay attention to all of this while giving commands and while collecting Mega Energy. All of this with purposefully maddening music blaring in the background. It's an intentional assault on your senses, and I love it. It's funny that my last point is about how the game uses every aspect of the gameplay, visuals, and even the music to overwhelm you, and this point is about how ZA treats you like a baby. The hand-holding in this game is kinda out of control. The beginning tutorial lasts between 2 and 3 hours, that's not an exaggeration, and you can't stray out of the intended path at all during that time. And the tutorials continue well into the mid-game. I understand that it's a very different game than Pokemon fans are used to, but this is ridiculous.
It doesn't stop there though. ZA gives you so many free Pokemon and not random garbage either. You get almost an entire team of very powerful Pokemon with pretty solid type distribution too.
There's your starter, of course, the Kanto starter you're given, you're forced to catch a Fletchling, Bunnelby, and then 5 other Pokemon in Wild Zone 1. Then you'll come across side quests that give you a Heracross and a Riolu, and you also get an Absol after your first Rogue Mega Evolution fight. An Absol! Playing devil's advocate for a second, I do think I know what Game Freak was thinking. They wanted to ensure you had a spread of typings and specific Pokemon with decent stats for some of the more significant jumps in difficulty, which do happen, but I still think they went too far. Thankfully, you aren't forced to use any one Pokemon, and I didn't use any of them in my playthrough other than my starter, and to be fair, X and Y did a lot of this too, but I still think it's bad design. Spoiler warning for the next section, I won't be showing anything major, but will be discussing around it. The story and lore is a pretty considerable high in ZA. It's not without its plot holes, but it's solid overall, and I'd describe the ending as pretty spectacular, aside from a pathetic excuse for a final boss. This also extends to the first part of the post-game story. The rest of the story ranges from boring to okay. It's really more about getting to know all the side characters, some of which are great and some of which are not. Unfortunately, ZA suffers from an over-reliance on context to fully grasp and appreciate the story, and it doesn't support it much in-game. It's kind of the opposite effect context had on Arceus. You didn't have to play the Gen 4 games to understand Arceus' story, but if you did, you'd be able to appreciate it all the more. I would almost consider X and Y's story as required reading for ZA, particularly in regard to Lysander and Team Flare, which is its own problem because what they're doing and why they're doing it is infamously vague, at least in the English version. Maybe the localization team were concerned that a criminal organization using a super weapon to kill vast amounts of people wouldn't go over well in a kid's game, because yes, that's what they were trying to do.
The games are not the best way to understand the story though. That would go to the Pokemon Adventures or Special manga, which gets even more specific and outlines that it isn't just random people that Lysander and Team Flare want wiped out, but specifically the poor. It's literally class warfare and oppression. And this is actually alluded to in the original games, albeit lightly by being offered to pay to join Team Flare. Don't believe me? Read the manga for yourself!
And then play ZA because it actually follows through with its political themes. There's an entire arc about a character who is so rich and powerful that she believes the world and people should function exactly how she wants them to, and acts accordingly. And those benches? Yeah, I don't think they were an accident. Once again, there's a lot of love and care that went into this game, and the story, lore, and themes presented are strong evidence of such. They even thought very carefully about the logo. I'm not going to spoil it here, but the logo is actually really clever, and you won't understand what it means until the end of the game. I really like it when media does stuff like that. I'm actually not done talking about the story, but I'm going to save it for a later section because I want to discuss pretty major spoilers at the end of the video. Don't worry, it fits with the ranking. But know that everything I've talked about so far isn't actually what ZA's story is about. For now, let's talk about how that story is presented. Pokémon Legends ZA has terrible voice acting. It's really, really campy, and it's clear the voice actors were phoning it in. Here, let me just show you an example. Your friend helped us, so we helped your friend. A beautiful little circle, isn't it?
Excuse me? You said on the phone that the interest is already up to 1 million now. You call that helping?
Of course they use a cliched mobster accent for the Rust Syndicate. It's overdone, but whatever, it's fun, and it's not that low of a low. I'm kidding, of course. There's no voice acting, none whatsoever, and it is very conspicuous by its absence. The cutscenes are even more awkward than the silent Scarlet and Violet scenes. Pokemon games have really needed voice acting since the beginning of the Switch era, and arguably the 3DS era to an extent. Figure it out, Pokemon Company, quit being cheapos. Now we come to rank C, for characters. Also spoilers. I think it's a strong point for ZA, but not the main cast. Team MZ is underwhelming and boring, unfortunately. Naveen is the sole exception. He's got a funny character and has at least a slightly interesting story. Lita is just criminally underutilized. Seriously, she has a great personality, but straight up doesn't have a story. We don't even get to see her dance. Tawny and Urbane have some minor conflict at least, and some funny interactions with Naveen, but their story is poorly handled overall. And you're a blank slate with zero agency. It's the side characters that are the highlights. Canary is fun and entertaining, with a neat little story and possibly a sad backstory. It's alluded to, and there's enough there to suggest what happened without the game clearly stating it. Ivor and Gwyn have a fun dynamic, even if their storyline is a bit laborious. Corbeau, Philippe, and the Rust Syndicate are really fun and goofy, and they're very likable. Oh, and Corbeau is Batman. Jacinth and Laban are perfect inversions of each other. Laban has been assimilated into high society by Jacinth, even though she wants to be wild and part of the rabble. She acts prim and proper while hiding her crazy and intimidating personality. Jacinth manages to be terrifying and imposing without breaking her high-class veneer. Honestly, it's really good writing. Griselle and Grisham, along with Mabel, are great explorations of the consequences these evil organizations have on people's lives. Other characters are pretty solid too. I found Vinny to be very likable with an intense aura when mega evolving. Emma kinda makes me uncomfortable. Why is she always wearing the expansion suit? She doesn't always wear it in X and Y, and she was being controlled in that game. And she doesn't even use it in ZA at all. We all know the real reason she's wearing it. At least her Naruto run is funny. But the best characters by far are Az and Elle. But I'll get to that at the end of the video. Once again, there's going to be some spoilers in this section, but they're very minor. ZA's postgame is very disappointing. It's way too grindy and repetitive, and it does not pay off. There are really two parts of the postgame. I actually highly recommend you play the first part of it. You'll be given the opportunity to take part in the ZA Royale again, do one round of it, get your Challenger's ticket, and then do the first promotion battle. After that's done, head to Hotel Z and complete the storyline that starts. I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's got the best boss fight in the entire game and is a fantastic send-off for both the game and the story that started all the way back in X and Y. The other part of the post-game is a huge letdown. First of all, there's a ton of side missions that pop up. They're all relatively quick, but some do get very annoying. Then there's the ZA Royale, or the Infinite Royale as it's called. Remember how I mentioned that the grindiness and inconsistency of the ZA Royale becomes a much bigger problem in the post-game? That's because in order to see the true conclusion of the story, you need to do the ZA Royale 15 times. And actually 20 if you want to do everything. Even if you do get perfect cards, which you won't, that's around 3 hours of pure grinding, and at this point your Pokemon are all probably pushing level 90 plus, while all your opponent's Pokemon will be around 75 or lower. Which means you will stomp everything, including the promotion matches. Even the last promotion match with your rival is a breeze. You do all of this to see the conclusion of Tawny or Urbane's storyline. Throughout the whole game, they have been saying they came to Lumiose to find someone without ever telling you who or why. And the answer is fine? Honestly, it was a little unexpected, but in a boring way. And then they conclude the story with a laughable decision, but it probably fits in the Pokemon world, so whatever. I'm not going to spoil it here, there's no reason to. You're free to look it up if you understandably don't want to go through that grind, which this scene was absolutely not worth. I might have been okay with 5 rounds of the Infinite Royale, not 15. But this does lead us to one of the highest of the highs. It's rank B for battles. Yes, I've gone through this entire video so far without talking about the battle system, when it's the biggest fundamental change to the Pokemon franchise since the beginning of the series. In my defense, it's an absolute triumph in my opinion, so I think it's deserving of its spot on the list. At first I wasn't sold on it. It's pretty button spammy early on, and because it's so simple, it doesn't feel all that different from the original turn-based battles. But as I got further into the game, I realized there's a lot of strategy to be learned and perfected. Each move is separated into a few different categories. Basic melee moves require a little charge up, quick melee moves like Quick Attack are lightning fast and can be used as gap closers as well. Then there are movement attacks like Flame Wheel and Rollout, which are also usually AoE moves. You can chain these back and forth, allowing for natural dodges. There are knockback attacks that push Pokemon out of range like Roar, and quick retreat moves like Volt Switch. Ranged attacks take longer to charge up but obviously happen at a safe distance, and then there are buff and debuff moves as well, which tend to have longer animations. And of course, there's Protect and Detect, which require actual timing to execute properly and are greatly rewarded if you do. Something different about this game is how switching works. You can switch at pretty much any time, including in the middle of an opponent's attack. Your Pokemon will have a bit of summoning sickness for lack of a better term. Basically, there will be a couple seconds when you can't act. It creates a little bit of risk when switching, requiring you to learn optimal times to do it. If done right, you can use a switch to dodge an attack. It's a solid translation from the turn-based battle system. Plus moves are a clever mechanic in the same vein as strong and agile style moves from Arceus. They use Mega Energy to allow Pokemon to attack as if they are Mega Evolved, which is very important for Rogue Mega Evolution boss fights. It's smart design because it allows every Pokemon to meaningfully contribute to battles with Mega and Rogue Mega opponents, regardless of whether or not they can Mega Evolve themselves. Pro tip though, click the plus button. Yeah, it definitely took me 20 hours to figure that out. Man, I really am a dodo bird. Honestly, the game can get pretty tough at times, especially if you're not super experienced or if you skip the side content and don't get ahead level-wise. Though if you understand how stats work, especially with Mega Evolution, you'll generally be fine. The competitive mode seems pretty fun. It's a little slow moving for my taste with the inability to run and dodge, though it's so chaotic maybe that's appropriate. It is really unbalanced right now, I will say. I chose Violence and decided to use Xerneas on my first match and tied for first without ever switching. VGC players are shaking in their boots for when that monster becomes legal again. Ranking up seems surprisingly fast at least. I went up like 3 ranks in one match and got both Greninjite and Chestnutite. The rewards seem decent overall actually. I think Game Freak really wants people to like these battles and experiment with the competitive. They're highly incentivizing it in-game with the inclusion of unique Megastones. Even though they're quick to get, I still think they shouldn't be locked behind online play. They're essentially paywalled because of the NSO requirement. I've made somewhat of a mini-series explaining how I think the battle system for Gen 10 and future main series games is going to be real-time as opposed to turn-based, and after playing ZA and its competitive, my level of certainty is rising, especially considering the existence of Pokemon champions. The battle system is shockingly successful. It even made the main story fun and challenging at times, when it's usually mindless. If this really is the future of Pokemon battles, I gotta say, I'm here for it.
Oh boy, here we go. This is the lowest low that ZA has to offer. Another spoiler warning, I'm going to be talking about the end of the game a bit. Pokémon Legends ZA has a pacing problem.
The The game is full of highs and lows, but the way it shifts between them can sometimes give you whiplash or bore you to tears. The 2+ hour tutorial section in the beginning of the game moves at a snail's pace most of the time, with endless hand-holding, but then the game picks up speed a good bit. Moving up the ZA Royale ranks is relatively quick and engaging. Side quests start to appear after most story beats, but it's generally okay because they are very quick. Then you jump from rank V to F, and the problems start to pop up. The next few story arcs are much longer than the previous ones, and now the Rogue Megas are included as well. Even worse is the side missions that start showing up at what seems like every transition. There was one point when I was on a main story mission when I had to run around the city, talk to someone, and then 4 more side quests would appear. I'd complete them, run to talk to someone else, and then 4 more would show up. You could just skip them, of course, but as I already talked about, they're important, and they'll stack up quick. This type of thing kills pacing in games. The characters are a lot more interesting in the later arcs, but not enough to be worth all the running around and talking the game suddenly wants you to do. The end of the game is generally really awesome. There are some very cool cutscenes, and a cool sequence of running through the city and fighting off hordes of rogue Mega Evolved Pokemon. But the final boss is a couple flowers. Not kidding, it's actually a couple flowers. I don't even mind the awesome cinematic fight with pointless inputs from the player, but you gotta back that type of thing up with an appropriately epic or challenging boss fight. In my opinion, it doesn't even need to be both, but maybe it really should. And Game Freak just doesn't do either. Add to this all the padding issues I've talked about throughout this video, and you have a perfect storm of terrible pacing. Which is a huge shame because ZA has a lot to offer. But the developers have made all these weird decisions that hurt the experience time and again. But now it's finally time for the highest of the highs. It's the music, because of course it is. This game is bursting at the seams with a top-tier soundtrack. Banger after banger. From the theme you're hearing in the background that has taken the internet by storm, to the Rogue Mega Evolution theme that is intentionally designed to stress you out, and every other song in the game. Music is an important part of storytelling in visual and auditory media, and Pokémon is no stranger to that concept. Let's be real, the series' music is always superb. I want to talk about one particular track in ZA and how it so effectively wraps up a story that started over 12 years ago. This is the biggest spoiler warning in the video. I'm going to be discussing the true ending of the game in some detail. This is the first part of the post-game I mentioned earlier. I won't be spoiling all of it, but I'll be talking about the biggest story beat. If you haven't completed the story and care about spoilers, I highly recommend doing so before finishing this video. Pokémon Legends ZA is a story first and foremost about redemption. It's a story about realizing the beauty of the world despite its flaws, despite its perceived ugliness. It's oddly poetic in a meta sense. The game itself is deeply flawed in many ways. But shining through is an incredible experience if you're able to compartmentalize. The music you're hearing is L's battle theme. You take him on near the end of the post-game story after the city is safe once again. This track is very unique. Most of the soundtrack is composed of remixes from the X and Y games, and if there is a new theme, it's associated with an entirely new character. This was the same in Arceus as well. L's battle theme is different though. It bears no resemblance to Lysander's original theme. It's an entirely new track with only whispers of the original motifs that quickly fade. The track is hopeful, resolute, and most importantly, at peace. It's a track about redemption. But then, why did the developers not just take the original Lysander theme and rewrite and recontextualize it? Well, I think this song isn't just about Lysander, it's also about Az.
Pokémon Legends ZA is a story about 2 men who have made terrible choices in life, with deep and dark consequences, both working to redeem themselves through supporting the efforts of others. and both which were pretty underdeveloped in the original X and Y games. ZA does a good job of concluding their stories with the grace and gravitas required for characters of their stature, while filling in the holes left in their stories. They went from being the least compelling villain and comrade in the series to two of the most compelling. Az has had to grapple with his sins for thousands of years, and finally they have been righted. Lysander now has faced his sins and has a new view on the world. Thanks to Zygarde, the children who thwarted him in X and Y, and those whom he supported in ZA, Lysander now has the opportunity to atone in his long life with a new approach. Both the ultimate weapon and Ange are fully disabled, and Az is finally able to rest in peace, while Lysander is finally able to live in peace. Where one journey ends, another begins. And that is truly beautiful.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Let me know how you feel about the game in the comments below, and please consider liking and subscribing if you've enjoyed this. I also have finally opened YouTube memberships if you're interested, and I have a 100% free Patreon with an optional pledge tier where I'm going to be posting updates and behind-the-scene tidbits. Feel free to check it out. Thank you so much for watching.